Oh, happy day. Oh, happy day. Oh, happy day.
Faith of our founding forefathers and mothers.
Jesus walked.
When Jesus walked.
History is God's providence in human affairs. Noah Webster.
When Jesus walked.
When Jesus walked.
He washed my sins away.
Bridget Biddy Mason was born into slavery in Georgia or Mississippi in 1818. Her first master was Robert Smithson, who later sold her to Robert and Rebecca Smith. Through her teen years, she developed three primary skills. First, in child care, which she developed while being a midwife. Second, in medicine, which she learned from her older slaves. And third, in livestock, which she gathered from years of living on a farm. As Biddy came of age, she bore three daughters, Ellen in 1838, Anne in 1844, and Harriet in 1847. Tragically, all were conceived from her slave master, Robert Smith. After converting to Mormonism, Smith moved from Mississippi to Utah, forcing Bridget to walk behind his wagon for 1,700 miles. In 1851, Smith moved again, this time to California, forcing Biddy to walk an additional 790 miles. As a consequence of the 1850 Compromise, also known as the Fugitive Slave Act, California entered the Union as a free state. However, Smith not only refused to free Biddy, but along with other white men, continued to bring slaves into the San Bernardino area. Subsequently, Smith decided to move again, this time to Texas. He told his slaves they would all be freed upon arrival, but actually intended to sell them. After Biddy uncovered Smith's true intentions, she feared of losing all her children, but had no knowledge of who she could turn to. She wanted to sue Smith, but blacks could not testify against whites in a court of law at that time. However, in the providence of God, he sent a white man who represented Biddy in court. After a bitter battle, where Smith lied, telling the court that Biddy wanted to go to Texas, and then tried to bribe Biddy's lawyer, and finally, and once again providentially, Smith missed the actual court date. Fed up with Smith, the trial judge Benjamin Hayes freed Biddy and all her family members. After 42 years in chattel slavery, she received her official documents of freedom in 1860. Incredibly, Bridget Biddy Mason went on to become a successful entrepreneur. She began using her skills as a nurse and midwife to deliver hundreds of babies in the Los Angeles area. Later, while depending on God's protection, when a smallpox epidemic hit, ignoring the threat against her own life, she cared for many who were ill. Saving her money carefully, she purchased 2 estates, making her one of the first black women to own property in Los Angeles, which she leased out commercially. As the city grew and her properties appreciated, she was able to amass a fortune of $300,000, which equals approximately $6.38 million today. In 1872, along with her new son-in-law Charles Owens, she organized the city's first black church, the First African Methodist Episcopal Church of Los Angeles, which began in her home on Spring Street. As perhaps the wealthiest black woman in LA, Biddy Mason later donated the land, as well as helped finance the building of her church. She also established the first elementary school for black children, as well as a daycare center for all children who had nowhere to go, whether black, white, or Hispanic. It was her faith in God, however, that inspired her to reach all children regardless of race. Furthermore, she was instrumental in founding a Travelers Aid Center, as well as reaching out to feed and shelter the poor and visit the prisons. Because of her kind, giving spirit for all who knew her, she was affectionately endeared with the nickname Grandma Mason. Finally, Biddy expressed her life's success philosophy through one of her oft-repeated sayings.
If you hold your hand closed, nothing good can come in. The open hand is blessed, for it gives in abundance, even as it receives.
Which, if you remember, sounds very much like the paraphrase, of Proverbs 10:4. He who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Through the grace of God, the successful entrepreneur, Bridget Biddy Mason, literally faced down the impossibility of slavery by harboring no anger, ill will, or hatred against any whites who oppressed and enslaved her. This godly attitude released the power of God, first to help her overcome any and all past offenses, and second, laid the foundation for God to answer her deepest heart's cry, which was to deliver her, her family, and her descendants from cruel chattel slavery. Yet it did not end there, as the God who is more than enough poured it on, rewarding her obedience by miraculously raising a former female slave who was sexually abused to the lofty heights of a multi-millionaire. Biddy's life of forgiveness and obedience to God is a success model to this present generation that, if you are willing and obedient, you will eat the good of the land.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me